If you think an LLC and insurance are enough to protect your assets, think again. In this episode of Pending and Trending, I'm joined by nationally recognized asset protection attorney Brian Bradley, who breaks down what every investor and real estate agent should know to protect their wealth. From piercing LLC myths to building real legal barriers before a lawsuit hits, this episode is a wake-up call for anyone serious about protecting their wealth. Welcome to Pending and Trending. I am your host, Deidre Quinn, and this podcast is all about helping real estate agents stay ahead in today's fast-moving market. With over 20 years of experience and a passion for building relationships, I bring you the latest tips, trends, and strategies to elevate you and your business. Whether you're looking to dominate a niche, stay sharp on industry shifts, or build your own generational wealth, you are in the right place. Let's get to it, because what's trending today can get you pending tomorrow. Welcome back to Pending and Trending. I'm your host, Deidre Quinn, and today we're diving into a topic that every real estate professional, investor, and business owner needs to pay attention to. It's asset protection. And today I am here with Brian Bradley. Brian is nationally renowned asset protection lawyer, financial planner, and a #1 best-selling author of the book Overexposed. He's dedicated to educating and empowering clients in the legal and financial fields. At Bradley Legal Corp, they specialize in a trifecta of advanced asset protection, comprehensive estate planning, and innovative financial strategies. Brian, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. And it's a critical conversation, especially now when we're living in a moment in time where the legal and financial and political systems are shifting fast and out of control, and most people aren't prepared for what's coming. So this episode, it's not just important, it's pretty necessary.
That's great. No, I can't wait to really share some of that information with our listeners. Let's just start at, for those of us that are listening here and new to the concept, how would you define asset protection and why it's critical for real estate professionals and other business owners right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the best starting point. What is this really weird term? And if we're going to clear it up, it's also important to know like what it is not. But asset protection is simply placing a legal barrier between your assets and a potential creditor, like the person suing you before there's a problem. That's it. It's just like a safe. You wouldn't leave your guns or your gold or precious gems sitting outside on the front porch. You'd lock them up. So same with your investments, your rental properties, your bank accounts. You want to place them behind legal barriers and out of your personal name so that they can't be easily reached by a lawsuit. And so we're always on these shows talking about freedom and financial freedom a lot. And we're entering an information era where nation states, regulations, and even civil courts are turning predatory, but not by accident, but by necessity. So as governments become more insolvent and the legal system becomes more politicized, asset protection is no longer just smart, it's essential. And so the wealthy don't own things in their personal names, their LLCs, limited partnerships, and their asset protection trusts do. They build layers of protection. They have asset protection trusts that are now across borders. And the last thing you want to do is own like 10 properties all in your personal name or just stuff them all into one LLC. That's just asking for trouble. This next part is really important. Asset protection is not about hiding money. It's not about dodging taxes. That's illegal. You're taxed on your worldwide income as a US person. Even if you move to Puerto Rico for cryptocurrency or you're Elon Musk mining asteroids for trillions of dollars in space, it's not about deception. It's about defense, smart, legal, court-proven defense. Now, here's where most people get it wrong. They think like a revocable living trust is going to protect them from lawsuits. They think owning 20 properties in one LLC is smart. They think insurance will save them. They think the judicial system is their friend, but they're wrong. LLCs are pierced regularly. They write books about them. Anybody coming right out of law school can pierce typically an LLC. Domestic trusts don't block lawsuits. They're not designed to. They don't have the teeth for them. Insurance companies deny claims all the time. The bureaucratic court system is not about justice any longer. So the two big takeaways are that Asset protection is not tax evasion. So if someone tells you, hey, set up this trust, never pay taxes again, run the other direction. That's a scam. The IRS even has an entire page devoted to trust scams, and that's one of them. And asset protection only works when it's done before there's a problem. Once a lawsuit starts, it's too late. Whatever you have in place once the lawsuit starts is locked in. We can't add anything new at that point. That's why we build these systems before the threat arrives, not afterwards. And
Right.
courts look at this through the lens of fraudulent conveyance.
Okay. Okay. So let's back up just a minute here for our listeners. And you talked a little bit about LLCs, and a lot of real estate agents have LLCs, a lot of investors have LLCs. So let's really dive into that a little bit more. And you're saying it's not a good idea to have all of your properties in one LLC and that they can be easily pierced, is what I heard. So, how do you recommend, like, how does that happen? How do they get pierced? And agents think they're fully protected. That's a myth, apparently. And what can you share with us, maybe a real live example of how that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a few ways to break this up too, but there's this myth that LLCs are a one size fits all silver bullet solution. People treat them like a magic pill that solves everything. When we're honest about it, we forget the first word, first letter, limited. Like they don't hide this fact. It's right in the name. Now, don't get me wrong, like I'm not anti LLCs. I use them all the time. We use them for every asset protection system that we set up, but it's a matter of how we use them, when we use them, and why we use them. LLCs are at the very bottom rung of asset protection to just get the assets out of your personal name. And then we stack and layer protection up from them from that point. But LLCs are foundational. So think of them like the base layer of clothing that you put on a cold winter day. That's that first thin shirt, that's your body armor. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So if you think one LLC is going to shield you from $1 million lawsuit, you're walking into a winter storm just wearing a t-shirt. So we use again LLCs to separate out risks. So anything with a key or that requires insurance or things that can go boom belong in LLCs. That's the base. Then again, we layer like a management company on top of that, and then an outer shell layer, which is your asset protection trust. Because real protection comes from the structures and scale, not from a document pulled from like LegalZoom or a genetic template. And this next part is where people really start getting confused on. Do you go to Wyoming or Delaware, Texas, Nevada? This is called jurisdiction shopping. Where do we set these LLCs up in? And it would probably be really important to break this down if you don't mind.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so the real question is what are we trying to protect against and what state actually controls the asset? So here's an example. California resident, and I use California a lot because it's just an easy state to pick on, and a lot of law follows what California is doing down the road.
Sure.
And so if you're a California resident and you form a Wyoming LLC and you think that you're going to magically adopt Wyoming law, but if that LLC owns, let's say like California real estate and it's paying California franchise tax, guess what? You've just domiciled or converted your Wyoming LLC in California, and you got to register it as doing business in California legally. There's no other way to do it if it's an out-of-state LLC. And then if you get sued, what law is going to apply? California law applies. And that was made crystal clear in a 2023 Supreme Court case called Mallory versus Norfolk, where the court ruled that states can assert jurisdiction over any company registered to do business in that state. So regardless of where it was formed. And as a Pennsylvania case that actually came from. So you can't just buy another state's better legal protections into a hostile legal environment, like let's say California, and expect them to travel with you. It doesn't work that way. You just can't go buy another state's more beneficial laws. And this is actually a critical distinction here, this next part, and where things go wrong. They confuse business disputes and contract law with tort liability, meaning personal injury and negligence. But contract law is not tort law. And if you don't mind, I can actually break that down so your listeners can get a very clear understanding of what that
Yeah,
difference.
break it down. Break it down.
Yeah, so you can and you do write choice of law and venue clauses right into contracts. We see them all day long. Like you can't sign a contract without seeing some sort of choice of law clause. But if someone like slips and falls on your rental property and cracks their skull open, that's tort law, right? Damage law, meaning personal injury, and state laws apply there. No LLC operating agreement will save you from negligence. And if your LLC is sloppy or undercapitalized, commingled funds, you don't follow formalities, the courts will pierce it. It's just not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And while we're at it, we can crush this other myth of this really big word that everybody's falling in love with, anonymity and LLCs and anonymous Wyoming LLCs. People are chasing anonymity like it's the holy grail, especially with Wyoming. Just create a Wyoming LLC and use a land trust. Hide your ownership. No one will ever find you. That's just completely wrong. That's not how the legal system works. First of all, the second a lawsuit is filed, you're in the system and you're going to be required to appear. You get served. Even if it's an LLC, the LLC gets seared. Congratulations, you're still going to be getting served. You're going to have to appear in court. And once you are in court, the discovery process begins and everything gets disclosed and comes out. And so once you're in court, the only way to stay hidden at that point in time is to lie. And that's called perjury. And then people go to jail for committing perjury. So privacy is good. I like privacy, but let's be really clear on this. Privacy is not protection. And I want to say that again because it's really important. Privacy does not equal protection. Privacy helps reduce harassment. It does not block judgments. And we have lots and lots of case law backing this up. Courts have ruled on these issues repeatedly in cases like Arbor Place LP versus Encore Opportunity in 2002, Block Communications versus Pounds 2015, In re Downey, In re Kwok, and a lot of others. And what's the right move here? We start with the basics, right? We form your LLC in the state the asset is located in. Like that's your legal home base. Then you layer on a management company, usually a limited partnership, and that helps clean you up from tax purposes. And then to protect the entire system, we then add on a really strong asset protection trust. So just think of LLCs like the base layer. Trying to get really overly creative with LLCs is not going to work, and the operating agreements will generally then not be recognized.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So at what point do you recommend that listeners pay closer attention to this and do something about it? Is it if they have one property? Is it if they have 10 properties? Like at what point should they be considering their options with
Yeah,
looking at it?
anytime you're going to make an investment that you can potentially get sued from or create a business, you're adding risk and liability. So if you don't factor in just like the basic formalities, like start with an LLC and insurance. And if you can't afford that, do not pull the trigger on the investment and don't pull the trigger on the business because the likelihood of you getting sued is going to be a lot higher, especially if you're starting out and don't know what you're doing, you're going to make a lot more errors. Contracts can fall
Sure.
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, so part of just adding investments and business is if you're painting a picture, your big red button is starting to expand and grow. And you just need to realize that. And I'm not saying don't increase your financial freedom and strength and don't make investments. I'm saying part of the analysis is what do we got to do now to protect ourselves from the risk and the downside? And kicking the can down the road is just going to Vegas and putting it all on red and seeing what happens. And I see this actually a lot. And the next thing you know, people grow, they get 10 properties, everything's in their personal name. And now they have a $2 to $5 million portfolio all in their personal name with $1 million lawsuit hanging over them. So I would say if we think about it in layers, right? I always think of asset protection in layers. And so when we go out on a cold winter day, like maybe we're going out on a ski trip, right? We got to get dressed to go outside. The first entry layer is your base layer, that thin shirt that sits on your skin. This is an LLC and insurance. This is when we're just starting out investing. And you're going to probably be around 0 to 250, 300,000 of exposed net worth, 0 to 1 or 2 properties. And
Right.
then as you grow and add more assets or more businesses and you hit that 4 unit mark or you're investing in multiple states, you might have multiple LLCs or you're creating a risky business and you have around 500,000 to 700,000 of net exposed assets. You're going to want a mid layer, which is usually a little bit thicker. So generally think of a merino wool sweater or a cardigan for you ladies. This is a management company or a limited partnership that we use. It adds another layer of protection, but it then helps clean us up for tax purposes so that we only just have one tax return, not like 10 LLCs all filing 10 tax returns. That's
Right.
crazy. And then when you hit around that 1 million net worth mark, you have a high risk job, maybe, or a lot of real estate. You want an outer shell waterproof layer. This keeps you nice and dry and warm when the weather is really bad. This is your doomsday lawsuit protection layer. This is your asset protection trust, which we can break down later on. But by layering, you're now more flexible. You can adjust to make yourself more comfortable. And that's what we want. And we just need to understand what bucket we're using for what purposes. So LLCs, just getting the assets out of your name, create something to hold them in, separate out risk into buckets. Management companies to clean you up from a tax perspective, right? Add another layer of protection, and then the big guns, asset protection trust for doomsday lawsuits.
Okay, let's dig into those asset protection trusts. And can you explain to us exactly how that works? And are they irrevocable trusts and how is that set up?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is are constantly confused on what asset protection trust even are. They think like a trust is a trust. And so this is where the heart and soul of a complete asset protection system comes into play. This is where we stop playing defense and start building your legal fortress. These are asset protection trusts, especially if you're in a high risk profession, like you're a doctor, CPA, business owner, pure real estate investor, and you have that $1 million or more in exposed net worth. I would never recommend saying, okay, hey, I'm just starting out, and then let's add the whole system in a Taj Mahal style asset protection plan for someone just starting. Like that's just,
Right.
it's too much. Like start where you're at, and then we always can
And
scale.
then build.
And then build. Yeah. As you add more, the system will grow with you. So don't think this is, oh my gosh, I have to get everything and make a massive investment. We analyze where you're at, or any good firm or attorney should analyze where you're at, start where you're at, and then we project to the future where we're going and build. Um, but when it comes to trust, right, not all trusts are created equal, but there's this misconception that a trust is a trust. But we all they lump them all up together, right? They think I have a revocable living trust, I'm good to go, but that's not the case. So think of trust ice cream, Baskin Robbins. There's lots of different flavors, and not all of them are the same, and not all trusts are built for asset protection. So let's break down a few of them just for understanding. We have the revocable living trust, right? The typical family estate plan. That's
Right.
just an estate planning tool. Like they're great for probate avoidance, naming beneficiaries, medical directives, financial directives, but they offer zero protection against lawsuits. Land trust, a really big one if you're in the real estate world that you hear people talk about, especially on like investment shows. They're often used for privacy in real estate, but they don't protect you. Their strength is only as good as the actual LLC they're connected to. And if
Mhm.
the LLC gets pierced, the land trust falls apart. And so another big version that you hear about are like tax trust. Think of a Delaware trust, generational wealth skipping trust, spousal trust. There's a lot of different names for them, but the common trend is they're tax focused, not lawsuit focused. So they usually can't be self-settled, which I'll explain in a minute. And that's very critical for asset protection. And then enter asset protection trust. Now we're starting to talk power from a defensive standpoint for lawsuits. A properly structured asset protection trust is self-settled, they're irrevocable, and they're spendthrift trust. And so self-settled means they're created for you, by you, as your own beneficiary. And not every state allows that. So I'll get to there in a minute. Irrevocable means its terms and its provisions are fixed, and a judge can't force you to change it. It doesn't mean you can't buy and sell assets. I get that all the time. Oh, if I create this irrevocable trust, now I can't do anything with my assets. No, that's the furthest thing from the truth. You can buy and sell and acquire, move assets in and out, all that you want. It just means that the provisions are fixed and a judge can't force you to revoke it. Spendthrift provisions are what gives these trusts their teeth against creditors. But here's the problem with anything purely domestic is that they just don't hold up in court. Judges are piercing them, unfortunately, left and right. Courts are ignoring the choice of law clauses, and they apply their own state's public policy, and this completely blow up the trust. And this is what a judge's superpower is their magic wand of public policy. And then we look at cases like In re Hubbard, Bately versus Mortensen, Dale versus Dale, 21 versus Wacker. These are real cases with real people who thought they were protected with domestic asset protection trust. and the trust completely lost and were blown up and they lost all their assets. So why do these domestic trusts fail? A limited number of states allow self-settled asset protection trusts. And big states like California, New York, Illinois, Florida, and Texas. And yes, I did say Florida and Texas. Don't recognize them at all. We got Kilker versus Steelman in California, Florida, Monette versus Brown, Texas courts, in Ray Blount. Here is what most people forget. We have a constitution, Article 4, right? Full faith and credit clause. What this means is that a California judgment must be honored like in a state like Nevada. You can't outrun a judgment in the US. So what's the solution? This is where we start hybriding trusts together, which I can break down if you want, of how we take like the superpower offshore trust and then combine them into one beautiful hybrid trust.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah.
Yeah, so a hybrid asset protection is combining the best of both worlds. We are the inventor of it. My partner, Douglas Laudmill, invented it about 30 years ago. And we have over 3,000 clients. And we've actually, over the last 30 years, had to this is battle tested in over 300 cases and it's never failed. So it's not just some like theoretical trust that was created that's never actually been utilized and tried in court. The hybrid trust or bridge trust combines the best of both worlds. The strength of the famous offshore Cook Island trust that you hear us talk about with statutory non-recognition of any court orders or judgments in the world, with the tax simplicity under IRS Section 7701 of a domestic trust. So think of it like a hybrid car, right? We're combining the offshore power with domestic control and we're just combining the best of both worlds. So how does all this work? A hybrid trust starts as a domestic grantor trust. So you don't trigger an offshore reporting requirements or big annual costs. So anytime we have to set up like a foreign trust, like a purely foreign Cook Island trust, they're the most effective and strongest in the world by far. The problem with them is though they're the most effective, they're very expensive to create. And then they're also come with mandatory IRS disclosures, which are also very expensive. And they're you also are generally going to have a lot of disclosures that you're going to do. So there's no privacy whatsoever, and then you're going to lose control of the trust. The benefit of a domestic trust is they're cheaper. You have no IRS compliance whatsoever, no disclosures requirements. The sad thing is, like I said, they just don't work. They're not effective. But by combining them like this and turning that offshore trust, so the IRS is saying, hey, look, we know you have an offshore trust. We don't really care. Congratulations, good for you. But if you follow this code section 7701, we'll classify it domestically for tax purposes. And that way you have none of those mandatory disclosures. And that's how we can have your cake and eat it too. Have the power and strength, like that Super Mario Brother power up in your back pocket if we ever need it. And then until we ever need it, the IRS will classify it domestically so we don't have to do any of the disclosures.
Got it. So a couple questions on that. What are the risks, if any, to somebody setting it up as you're suggesting?
In what way? Like risk? What are you thinking?
Is there a risk of them setting it up that way? You said that it hasn't been pierced, right? So what is the risk as far as doing that? Is there,
I think a lot of people, there's not much risk in setting it up, right? That's the whole purpose of them is get the power of the offshore with the tax simplicity of the domestic. I think there's a lot of myths of risk because in the US, we're not used to using offshore trustees or offshore trusts. So one myth that people think is a risk is what happens if the offshore trustee just disappears with my money. And it's virtually impossible. Just think about the banking system and the trust system. So you have you as the trustee and the beneficiary, and then you have an offshore trustee on standby. We just use the best in the world that created the first asset protection trust 40 years ago. And then you have your trust protector, which is your attorney. It should be your attorney and a law firm overlooking everything. And then you have your bank, which not a penny in the world can ever be moved out of a bank, let alone a Swiss bank, with not you just knowing about it, but without you actually signing off and authorizing it. And so when you have all these four-way checks and balances, like it is virtually impossible for a penny to just disappear without you signing off on it. Another myth is if I go offshore or if I ever have to, wouldn't I just be audited? If you were to go to Belize or the Caymans, those areas, Probably because they're known as tax havens. That's the issue when you go to cheap versions of offshore trust is you would probably be red flagged if you utilize those areas because they're known as tax havens for hiding money. The benefit of the Cook Islands is they're tax neutral. They don't even dip their pinky toe into the tax world. It's just purely asset protection. So the good thing is you're not going to be red flagged and audited for it. They're pretty common worldwide, Cook Island trust. I think those are like the two biggest myths is just I want the strength, but I'm afraid of losing an offshore trustee. And then tax wise, would I trigger an automatic audit just by setting these things up?
Wow. So that's great. That's great. Great information. Now, if someone's thinking, wow, this all sounds important, it's new to them, where do I even start? What's the first step you recommend that they take?
Yeah, the first step I would say is research, right? And then realize not every firm in the world is going to offer this level of protection. And so a good step would be like jump on my website, www.btblegal.com. I create it as an educational resource for people with lots of videos, presentations that I do because I teach a lot of continuing legal education courses for lawyers to learn these systems and the law behind it. So those are you can access those right there. I have over 90 published articles that people can read on asset protection and even state by state, as well as my book where I break down Overexposed, where I break down the whole world of asset protection because there was never a horn book that was actually created for asset protection. And so I think the first step is just start doing research and before you start talking to a firm, and I would also recommend talk to an actual firm, like a law firm, not a legal solution provider. They're very big distinctions. You'll get to some people where you think you're talking to a law firm and you're talking to a salesman, not an attorney. And then they'll tell you, oh, we have attorneys in the back room that draft all the documents if there's an issue. Well, a salesman shouldn't be giving you legal advice. First of all, they're not attorneys. And then I would be uncomfortable protecting all of my assets if I'm not actually speaking to an attorney giving me legal advice, just someone, ghostwriting templates in the back. Make sure you want to get good legal advice. And then depending on the level of that you're at, not everyone focuses on high-end protection like this. Most firms and even business solution providers focus on LLCs and insurance. I
Right.
equate it to going fishing and casting the widest net. Most businesses look at what can I use to cast the widest net and catch the most fish. That's LLCs and insurance. There's a small number of firms that then focus on the higher, bigger, high risk clientele where we utilize these higher levels. So you got to have to look at it as what is my need? What is my true risk? Am I a doctor investing in this with real estate? Am I 100% real estate investor with 10 properties? I'm going to probably have to find a firm that focuses on this higher level stuff because the cookie cutter like LLC insurance and management company, you outgrew. You just have too much risk and we have to bring in some bigger layers of protection for you. So just again, do the research, know yourself and where you're at, and then start hunting down the right firm to work with.
That's great. That's great. Now, Brian, where does your firm, where do you cover?
Oh, everywhere nationally. So I'm based out in Portland, and then my partner Doug is out in Scottsdale, Arizona. And then I manage over 100 attorneys and firms nationally, and we have clients in every state. We have over 3,000 clients in every state and throughout the world.
Okay, that's great. I did check out your site. It's an excellent source of information. So I do recommend our listeners go to www.btblegal.com. Is that right? And start that research. Let's talk quickly about your book, Overexposed. What inspired you to write it, and how can it help people in their research?
Yeah, I wrote it because as I was getting clients calling in, there's just so much confusion, misinformation. I would listen to this episode, I listen to this show, I heard some salesman or promoter talking about this. When I'm doing my research, there's misinformation or marketing schemes, and they were just completely confused. And so as I was looking at this, I'm like, what books are available for you? What are you looking for? That there's no overall reaching horn book explaining all the different buckets and layers. And so as I was talking about this at different investment shows and educational platforms, when I started researching, I said, oh my gosh, they're right. There is no overall horn book on just what does the world of asset protection look like? What are the different layers? What are the pros and cons of each layer? And how do we scale this as we grow? It was all just, here's an LLC, here's a series LLC, here's a land trust. And that was about it on the conversation and the scope of knowledge. And so I realized if no one's written the book and no one's explained this to the mass volume of people, I'm just going to write the book myself. And
Right.
I took my talking points of what I did and then got together with my publisher and we just wrote the book. And that's now sets the scene of here's the horn book, here's why the world is what it is, here's how legally it changed during the 60s as the court system changed and what happened in the past doesn't work anymore in the realms of asset protection. So here's the new world we're living in. Old ways of protecting wealth doesn't work because of these cases. Here's the new way of protecting wealth. And then here's all the law behind it. And so that was the purpose of the book, was just to give people a deeper understanding of the journey we had to go on and then what works now going forward.
That's great. That's great. And you can get a copy of your book, Overexposed, through the link on your website. Am I correct at
Yeah,
right?
you can get it on a link on my website or just go straight to Amazon. The link on my website goes to the Amazon site for the book.
That's great. If there was one thing in closing, Brian, that you wanted to share with us and our listeners that can help them build their generational wealth and protect it, what would that one thing be?
I'll say whatever you're going to do, you just got to eventually got to decide and go. It's so easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis. I got to read one more thing. I got to read this. We'll do one more thing. I got to think about it and read one more thing. And then you get stuck. And after you read a few, three, four books or whatever, like you'll find out they start getting repetitive. That's where I always just say, and eventually you got to just jump in the deep end of the pool, kick your arms, move your arms around in your feet, start floating, and then you'll start figuring out how to swim. You're going to make errors and mistakes. You're going to swallow some water, but the likelihood of you drowning is going to be is small at that point in time. Like you're going to learn by mistakes. You're going to have to jump in and go. So don't let yourself get stuck in analysis paralysis. If it's in business, real estate, or even like what to do to protect my assets or investing in different mechanisms, you're going to have to just make a decision and go.
Make a decision and go. I love that. I love that. Brian, thank you so much for sharing such powerful insights today and for breaking down the myths around LLCs, helping us understand the strength of asset protection trusts. This conversation is a wake up call for anyone serious about safeguarding their financial future, especially those in real estate, but also other businesses. And in a world where one lawsuit can undo years of hard work, your strategies are not just helpful, they're essential.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
If today's episode sparked questions or concerns about your own protection plan, don't wait until it's too late. Take action, educate yourself, and get the right team in place. Brian, thanks so much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap on this episode of Pending and Trending, where hot meets what's happening in real estate. If you found today's conversation helpful, we'd love for you to hit follow or subscribe, leave a quick review, and share the episode with fellow agent or industry pro. Got a trend, tip, or hot take we should be talking about? Send it our way, and we might feature it in an upcoming episode. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, stay sharp, keep your transactions in motion, and let your energy keep trending.